Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Since joining Forum Strategy in January, this is my first in-person event, and it's great to be able to put faces to names. And of course, to talk away from computer screens about such important issues as those we're going to talk about throughout the course of today. We're brought together today through a shared desire to do as much as possible to ensure our children and young people develop to become healthy, successful, and hopefully happy individuals. And not only this, but we also want the people under our care and leadership to flourish too. There is something special, I think, about this shared sense of purpose and community. And I think it's a solid basis from which to talk to you today about a topic that really does require that shared sense of commitment in order that we see real positive change come about. As members, partners, and associates of Forum Strategy, you will know our values as an organisation, not least our commitment to supporting you to thrive and develop as CEOs, COOs, and executive leaders in your incredibly challenging roles, leading complex organisations at the heart of our communities. But to support fully is also to push and develop thinking. Our commitment to you is that we will surface and share intelligence, helping you stay ahead of key societal trends, and to focus on areas we are hearing are of vital importance to communities. Michael has talked earlier about the need for proactivity and the driving of change from the front. He's challenged us not to wait for directives that may never come. If ever there was an area that exemplifies that, I think diversity and inclusion must be one of those. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'll talk to you today about the pivotal, first-of-its-kind research that we've commissioned on diversity and inclusion among CEOs in the trust sector. We know there already exists a growing body of research on governance, teacher, and school leadership diversity. So we stepped into an area of little or no real intelligence so we could try to bridge that gap. The role of Trust CEO, although relatively new in the wider education sector, is a critically important one. Not only in setting the vision and the values of the organisation, but in role modelling and leading by example. As CEOs, you are inevitably watched by the wider community, your stakeholders, your pupils, and of course, your staff as well. People look up to you and may even one day want to walk in your shoes. But the truth is, as Saeed rightly said earlier, people often struggle to be what they cannot see. So we invested the funding and the resources in this really important work just because we believe it to be the right thing to do. This cannot wait. The time has to be now to do something really tangible, particularly when we consider the alarming findings in other sectors. Research from Green Park earlier this year found that in the FTSE 100, just 12% of the top roles go to women. And for the first time since the analysis began, there were no black chairs, CEOs or CFOs in the FTSE 100. We must be able to benchmark against what we're seeing elsewhere in education and just as importantly in wider industries. We must know how we compare as a sector, particularly a sector that is so inherently values-driven and plays such a pivotal role at the heart of our society. Today is the first presentation of the findings so far, and we hope it will generate just some discussion and some reflection without judgment. We will, of course, share the full report with you after the conference as well. So, at the beginning of July, we began our work with Public First, a highly credible, experienced public policy and research company with whom some of you may be familiar. Public First brought to the project, among many things, a thorough and in-depth understanding of national polling, but also, more importantly, the effective running of focus groups. It was essential that we got a broad picture and range of views through the national polling, but that we had depth through focus groups where we could actually hear experiences and ideas. Our audience for the poll and focus groups were very specifically aspiring or serving CEOs. So I'm going to share with you now some of the key findings. Let's start with some positive news. The vast majority of CEOs or aspiring CEOs support diversity and inclusion, which I think is a really positive starting point. Almost 70% agreed or strongly agreed that schools, academies, and academy trusts should represent the communities they serve. However, this does also mean that 30% didn't agree or were unsure, which I think demonstrates a little way for us still to go. People willingly engaged with the work, and that's a really important start. Recognition of the importance of this issue is really valuable, and people clearly feel that more could and should be done. We've seen really good engagement with the polling, and in particular, the focus groups, demonstrating the sector's willingness to want to change things for the better. We've seen passionate participation in our focus groups from across varied backgrounds and roles in the sector. People have often taken part because they've pursued this as a personal mission of theirs. So moving us now on to another slightly more encouraging finding. From the analysis we've undertaken in several regions, the percentage of female CEOs was between about 40 to 46, varying, which would suggest that gender diversity is improving in the sector. But when we put that against the 12% in top roles in the FTSE 100, it suggests that trust leadership is seeing a positive shift. In higher education, we see only 29% female vice-chancellors, and in policing, only 35% female chief constables. There is more that needs to be done, of course, to achieve real representation, but it indicates a positive starting point for the trust sector. And we can see that things have been feeling like they're improving, which is also important. Over 60% agreed or strongly agreed that career prospects for people like me have improved in education over the last decade. That includes leaders who represent the protected characteristics. And there is also significant hope that things can continue to improve further still. We heard a range of ideas for potential ways to improve the system. Focus group participants were very positive about the opportunity to discuss openly and honestly without fear of judgment or recrimination. We also heard the value of seeing work like this led by organisations who do represent the sector. So there is hope, and where there is hope, there is opportunity. But whilst there are some positive findings, we must also discuss the findings that show where we absolutely must do better. According to our results, education doesn't feel diverse as it stands. Over 50% of CEOs and aspiring CEO respondents strongly disagreed that the education sector is an equal playing field for people like me. And 57% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that some barriers to progression for people like me are hidden. This really clearly shows many people are facing and experiencing inequality and facing so-called hidden barriers to moving onwards with their careers. We heard shocking stories of direct discrimination too, including a head teacher from a minority ethnic background aspiring to become CEO, being ignored by contractors on site in favour of white colleagues. This type of behaviour and the experiences we've been hearing about cannot be allowed to continue in a sector which is all about teaching the next generation. So I'll move us now on to our next finding, which I think will provoke a little bit of reflection. We found that diversity is potentially better understood than the concept of inclusion. During focus group sessions, participants found it relatively easy to articulate what greater CEO diversity would look like. However, they found it more challenging to articulate what inclusion would feel like. This is an interesting point to consider, as one could argue that diversity without inclusion is only really a short-term success. Unless we think really carefully about how we create, encourage, and develop inclusivity, we may well lose the diversity that we work so hard to bring through. Not only do we need to increase diversity by bringing through more diverse leaders, but we also need to create an inclusive culture to retain them in the longer term. And for the final finding to share with you today, I wanted to end on strategy. 65% of those who responded to the survey confirmed that they have an equality, diversity, and inclusion strategy in place. But 35% didn't have one or were unsure. I've ended on this finding purposefully. It's a success and it's also a challenge. We're really heartened to hear that most trusts have a strategy in place, as it suggests a level of commitment and one that's measurable. But for the 35% who don't have or don't know if they have one, a strategy, we must wonder why. Perhaps it's incorporated into another strategy, or perhaps it's not something seen as requiring one. As we often talk about at Forum Strategy, a clearly laid out strategy is really important, particularly with something as complex as diversity and inclusion. So if you do have one, how often is it updated and reviewed? And who is actually involved with the reviewing of it? And if you don't have one, how will you map out and measure progress? And how is the trust held accountable on this matter? And so we come back once more to accountability. I think it's important as well as we talk about these things that we recognise that as trust leaders, you can't drive changes of this scale and significance alone. You need the support of your board of trustees if this is to become a recognised trust priority. And further still, that boards themselves must become more diverse if they are to lead by example and seek to recruit more diversity into trust leadership. This is something we talk much more about in the research. Indeed, there also needs to be responsibility taken from those in the sector who set national direction and monitor progress. And unwavering support should be offered by these organisations to trusts who are really leading the way in this vital area for education. Significant, sustainable diversity and inclusion progress must have all the players on the pitch. Therefore, within our research, we've made 10 recommendations for change, some of which are aimed at trust level for you to consider and take forwards within your own trusts, and others are for larger bodies and organisations that represent the system too. However, as today is more about the autonomy and power that you have as leaders to make change without waiting for directives, let's focus for now on the recommendations that we've aimed at trust level. Firstly, we need to seek to create safe, non-judgmental opportunities for discussion on this. The ability to talk about diversity issues in a safe, supportive environment is the key to having productive, educational discussions that move people's thinking on. This could be dedicated training sessions, a time slot in regular meetings, or something else. Secondly, let's consider policies. Let's as leaders be absolutely clear on our intolerance in all its forms of discrimination, the consequences if it is witnessed, and where people can go for support. Having a clearly articulated policy for staff, where you also outline how people will be measured against it, sends the clearest of messages to staff, pupils, and parents. Linked to this, we need measurable objective setting. We all know that what often gets measured gets done. So laying out what exactly you want to achieve in this area across your trust and what the measures are to track progress will be key. Michael has often talked about pure accountability, that as trust you are accountable to your communities. And this is an area undoubtedly those communities will want to know more about. On our fourth trust recommendation, we talk about auditing and improving recruitment practices. Time and again, the issue of recruitment approaches that directly or indirectly disadvantage those from underrepresented groups was raised. How often does your trust scrutinise attraction and recruitment strategy and practice? Could your trust do more to reach out to underrepresented groups specifically and ensure that the recruitment process is absolutely fair for all? Are your recruitment panels diverse enough? And these are just some of the questions that we bring up. Often, aspects of your practice will be absolutely spot on and there is no need to change some of it, but other elements will need some attention. Understanding where the improvement points is a really good starting point. We also talk about access to coaching and mentoring for underrepresented groups. I'm sure many of us already know the power of high-quality coaching and mentoring. So putting in place a positive action offer for individuals currently underrepresented at leadership levels can be highly impactful. Communications about why positive action is needed and being clear that this is not a deficit model by implying that those from underrepresented groups are less capable or skilled will be really important to get right if it is to be received well. And on the final trust recommendation, we talk about the benefits of finding good practice and access to networks. There are many knowledgeable people and groups out there who can talk really, really expertly on this subject, which is quite appropriate for today, really. To progress, develop, and learn, access to networks of peers and good practice examples is essential. So thinking about who you can learn from on diversity and inclusion and accessing networks who will supportively push and challenge your thinking is an absolute must-have. Only by coming together as a community of leaders who want to see the diversity and inclusion picture shift will we have the power to fully achieve it. In outlining just a few of the many findings and recommendations from the research, an important point to mention here is that we're not suggesting that we at Forum Strategy hold all the answers. The research we commissioned didn't have the aim of sweeping in and saving people, but to identify, acknowledge, and start discussions as to how we as a collective address barriers and inequalities. In fact, we look to you as leaders today to help identify the measures needed to secure diversity and inclusion within your own trusts, and more broadly as a community of trust leaders who want to come together to see real progress on this. As we will hear from Liz Williams, Social Mobility Commissioner this afternoon, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And she will also show that inequality is everywhere, even in digital, which many might assume would be highly accessible. So this raises many questions for us. Not least, how do we maximise opportunities and minimise inequalities for aspiring CEOs? Are we able to take responsibility for becoming conscious of the barriers and put in place real sustainable actions, making sure that opportunities are fair for all? What can we do to make sure that talented people from every background, belief, and identity know about the opportunities to progress and develop, regardless of how connected or not they may be? And what do we need in order to make this a real priority across trusts? I told you we didn't have all the answers, and we have more questions than we can answer today, but that's okay. Today is about surfacing, discussing, and reflecting on issues that are not easy and do not have straightforward answers. The power of today is in the bringing together of many excellent minds to start to consider what is within your control to do as an individual, an organisation, and as a national collective. There is always something that can be done. So let me end on this from Barack Obama. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And if there is one thing that you can take away from the last 15 minutes or so, let it be that you can take some action on this, whether that is today, tomorrow, or next week. And we look forward to supporting and working with you on this, on what comes next. Thank you.